If we try to go to a book that doesn't exist, like not a book, as you can see, I've been there before, we just land on this loading page forever. And if you take a look at the network tab, you're going to see right here that we're actually making fetch requests to not a book on a regular interval. This is something that React Query does automatically. It just does automatic retries on an interval. And we want to make it not do that if we get a 404 for a particular book. And in general, we just want to control a little bit more how React Query manages these kinds of errors, because we actually already have error boundaries set up in our app. So if we look at the authenticated app, we can see that we've got an error boundary around the whole app. So if something really bad happens somewhere in the app, we'll at least show some error. But then we have another more tightly coupled error boundary here around our app routes. So we do have a fallback if there's an error that happens in our runtime, and it would be nice to just reuse that for errors that happen when we query some data. And we can configure React Query to do that on a query by query basis or just globally. And that's what we're going to do, is configure it globally. So around our application, we're going to render a React Query provider. To do that, we need to import that from React Query. We'll get our React Query config provider, and we'll put it right here. We'll grab that app and stick it right between those. And then the config provider accepts a config prop, which we'll assign to a query config. And then right here, we'll specify for our queries, not for our mutations, but for our queries, we want to use error boundary true. So if there is an error, we want the error boundary to handle that error. So React Query will just throw that error and allow our error boundary to handle it. And then also, I actually want to configure the retry. So we could configure it to just retry twice or retry once or 0 times, but we can also configure it with a function, and I'm going to accept the failure count and the error. And with that, I know that if the error status is 404, then we're not going to bother retrying, so we'll just return false. Otherwise, if the failure count is less than 2, so we haven't retried twice already, then we'll return true and we'll allow them to retry it again. Sometimes there are weird network things, and maybe retrying it will fix the problem. Finally, if neither of those is true, then we'll just return false. So let's save that and see what happens now. We land on this page and boom, we get a single 404 and it says, whoa, I'm not going to continue. We're going to just show the error and it says book not found. One other thing that I want to configure here is refetch on window focus, and we'll set that to false. But I'm going to comment that out really quick to show you what this is even doing. So here we'll go back to a real book here. And you'll notice here are all the requests that I've made. I'm going to clear those out. Then I'm going to go out and back in, and you'll notice that I'm actually making those requests again. Now, this might be a good idea for some apps, but I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense for ours. And so I'm going to turn that off with refetch on window focus. And now you'll notice I clear this out right here, and I come back, and it does not refetch those queries. So in review, what we did here is we imported React Query config provider from React Query. We rendered that around our application, and we passed our own custom configuration for queries, where we say we want you to use an error boundary. So if a query fails, then go ahead and just throw that error, and our error boundary will handle it just fine. We turned off refetch on window focus because that's not a feature that we want in this application. And then we configured retry with our own custom function to say if the error status is 404, then we don't want to bother retrying. Otherwise, we'll allow them to retry a couple times. Otherwise, let's stop retrying.